Hi, good morning, Shelby. This is episode 3 of Creative Outlet.
Woodpecker.
That's a woodpecker on the telephone pole. This is Bill, my dad, and we're at his house in Lakeland. And he's been entertaining my daughter while I've been filming the other shows, so I thought we'd hop over to Bill's and see what he's been working on. One of those things is putting up this tent for Josie to play in and doing some landscaping, but he's also made some significant progress on his website. So I wanted to talk about that and some of the photos that Bill's featuring on there, especially the ones that are shot here in Florida.
Sure.
Okay. All right, so yeah, just tell us about a few of the photos on the site.
Well, one of them that a lot of people seem to like was a sandhill crane baby. They're called Colts. They're always cute to shoot because they kind of prance around like a drum major in a band or something when they're little, the feet up in the air. But this particular one that I caught was just after it was born. They're born in the marsh and just above water level, but then they get out of there pretty quickly because in the open they're not safe from the eagles or a hawk or some other predator bird. The little colts need protection. So they bring them over to the trails that are in the marsh where the photographers walk up and down and people are just walking. And these were just coming out of the marsh for the first time. They were tiny little colts. There were 2 of them. And we happened to see them on the trail, so I had a long lens, and these guys are only this tall, maybe 4 inches tall. So even with a long lens, you'd have to be pretty close to them. So I got lower and lower and lower, and finally got right down on the trail and was shooting them. And I got a couple of good shots of 2 of them chasing each other. It looked like 2 little kids having the time of their lives. And then finally, just for a second, one of them was going away from me and stopped and leaned way over and looked between its legs back toward me. And the back end of it was all covered with these green little stickum things from the marsh. So it looked like he was looking under there thinking, what is all that stuff stuck on my butt? And so it was a pretty funny once-in-a-lifetime shot that just happened to catch, but it's a pretty funny picture. So that was fun. And one that I remember was here just outside of town. Another thing that happens here, sometimes we get spoonbills that come in. They're roseate spoonbills, and they're beautiful. They have some red and pink plumage on them, and then that goofy spoony looking bill. So they're always fun to shoot. A lot of times you get shots that are just kind of ho-hum. There's a spoonbill, but every now and then you'll get one taken off into a blue sky, and you think that's going to happen all the time, but you look back on it, and I can think of 5 years ago there was a day when there were 20 of them in a pond, and they took turns, just kind of lifted off and followed each other out, and I had all these opportunities. So you're just lucky when things like that happen, and take advantage of them and get some almost once in a lifetime shots. So those are beautiful birds to take here.
What about the fox?
Yeah, don't have that many foxes around here. A friend of a friend lives outside of town and called my friend who called me and told us we could come up. There was a fox that had a den behind his house. And so we made several trips. If the mother fox saw us, she was very sly and shy and would run away and not be around. But the 3rd time we went, I took a little camouflage and put it over me. And she could still see us, but it made me feel better about what I was doing. But eventually she walked up, and a few of the little kits came out of the ground and approached her, and they were looking to see what kind of food she was bringing back for them. And so in those situations, everybody knows what a fox looks like, so you're not just shooting pictures and saying, look, I got a picture of a fox. You're kind of looking for a story. So what I tried to capture was when the little fox was, the tender moments when the little fox is looking up at the mother, or sometimes she's sniffing to smell what the mother fox has, or sometimes it just wants some attention. And the mother was looking right at me in this particular picture, protecting and making sure the little one's safe with us standing there. So when there's a story behind it, it's a lot more interesting, a picture. So that was a fun opportunity too.
Yeah. Can you identify these birds that are singing as we're talking? They're kind of drowning you out at
There's
times.
a few pileated woodpeckers around here and some red-bellied woodpeckers around here. And some squirrels around here.
Squirrels.
So, yeah, there's a woodpecker on the pole again.
I didn't realize the neighborhood was so active till I started recording it.
There's a few owls every now and then, too.
Oh, really? Man. All right, so we've got a few questions lined up for Bill, and we'll just get to know his work a little bit better. So, Dad, you were talking about the gear that you're using and the long lens, and I'm sure a lot of photographers out there and even people that are just doing the basics are curious how you're getting these shots and what kind of camera gear you're using.
Well, my lenses have gotten longer and longer. The more time I've spent, I love to go to Yellowstone, particularly in the spring. And distance is usually a problem out there. The wolves are a long ways away. You want to be, the minimum distance to a bear or a wolf is 100 yards. Well, you won't get a wolf that close usually, but you want to be able to shoot as close up as you can of a bear without invading its space or blocking its path or getting too close to it. So a long lens is helpful out there. So for that reason, I've gone from, I have a zoom 400 lens that I use here in the marsh, which works pretty well. And then I had a 500 millimeter lens for a while, and I traded that in and got a 600 millimeter lens. So, but that was mainly because of the distance you need to be from animals out in Yellowstone. So I like the fixed lens, the 600 millimeter. I use Canon equipment. And when I'm here in the marsh with the birds, you never know whether you're going to see a little bird on a tree 5 yards from you or an eagle flying 50 yards from you. So a zoom lens is very handy when you can zoom in or zoom back out for something up close in the marsh here. But in Yellowstone, generally, things are going to be a long ways away. I actually carry 2 cameras out there most of the time. I'll have my long lens for whatever I'm shooting, and if it's a coyote or something that can come closer, I have a second camera hanging over my shoulder so I don't miss a shot. If something runs up within 10 yards, a coyote or something that doesn't matter too much, then you can still get the shot with a shorter lens. So
Yeah, I think that was my experience when I was in Yellowstone with you one time. There was we were scanning, we were driving down the road and scanning for images off in the distance, and then a fox ran right beside the car, and I had my long lens on. I was like, I can't get it. I can't get it at all.
yeah, and it had a bird in its mouth or something.
Yeah, it did. And it just hunted something. So yeah, I had a great time a few years ago when I went to Yellowstone with Bill, and I realized that every time I'm with him, he teaches me something about the outdoors too. He can on sight and sound identify animals faster than I usually begin to see them or sense their presence. And I remember one time, probably the first day we were out in Yellowstone, driving down the road and looking for some animals, and I didn't see anything. And Bill's driving along, and he's like, "Coyote 600 feet that way," and I'm like, "Where?" And he's like, "Red hawk up in the pine tree, third one on the right." I'm like, "What?" And then he's like, "Elk crossing the street up there," and I haven't even seen the coyote yet. And I'm like, "Well, what is he seeing?" So that's one thing I noticed is you're very in tune with the surroundings and being able to spot the signs of animals, or just
that's a lot of fun, and it actually helps in the photography too. If you have a mother bear with cubs, you can sort of anticipate what they're going to do most of the time. The mother is looking for grass or something along near the road, nourishment, and then she's going to nurse the babies. So you can kind of predict where she's going to go back and forth through the grass. If she's moving right, you have a long lens, you want to move further to the right to stay 100 yards from her and have her coming towards you. You always want to have her moving toward the light if you can. The little cubs are trickier. You want to be ready for opportunities when they stop and play with something or play with each other, or if they get close to the mother. A lot of times early on they're afraid to come out in the open. So if you get them out in the open with the mother for just a second when they first come out in the morning, get those shots, be ready for them, because I've had them run back in the woods and never show up again all day. And you can hear them back there crying. They're afraid to come out. So just have to learn the habits and the animals.
All right, speaking of bears, you got the chance of a lifetime. Was that last winter?
It was actually March, the beginning of March, yeah.
Yeah.
Went up into northern Manitoba, Canada. Lots of people have heard of Churchill. They actually had a TV program for a while about the polar bears around Churchill. And you can go up and ride around in buggies and see the polar bears in the fall waiting for the ice to form on the sound up there. But this was in the spring, and the idea was to go out to an area where the polar bears actually den and have the opportunity, hopefully, of seeing polar bears come out of a den, so with cubs. So I had the opportunity to do that. We went to Churchill. We took a train out in the middle of nowhere, and the train stopped, and we got off, and they picked us up in a snow coach, and we went to a lodge, which was a little building with little rooms and bunk beds, but nevertheless, it kept us out of the cold.
Yeah.
And the next day, we were snowed out. There was a whiteout. I mean, we only had 6 days, and there went one of them. The third day that we were there, we got out, and there were a couple of guys on snowmobiles. These were Cree Indians who actually owned the business where we were staying, and they went out scouting to find a polar bear den and found one. And they had been around that, the people who had been there before us, for 8 days and had not seen a polar bear come out of there, except to lift its head and put it back down. Didn't want to come out. So the first day that we were there, we got out, and it was 20 or 30 below zero, and the wind was blowing 40 miles an hour. So I don't know what the real field temperature was, but it was cold. And we stood most of the day waiting, but after, I don't know, maybe 2 hours, the head came up. It was the mother bear, and she came right on up out of the den, just a hole in the ground. And within 2 minutes, 2 more little heads popped off. The baby cub polar bears came out of there, and it was just amazing to see. You wanted to stop and just watch, but I kept thinking, concentrate on getting the pictures. So the mother would come out, and she would roll around in the snow and try to get some mud off of her. She was actually in a den that had some mud in it. And she did a shake, and the snow went flying. And I was trying to focus and get that shot, which I did. But anytime the cubs got near the mother, you tried to take that picture, and they would play a little bit, and they would run. And it's hard to describe being there and seeing what's probably the first days in the lives of those little cubs, when they were walking up and sniffing a bush and then running and chasing each other and stopping and trying to climb up a little tiny tree that's this tall, and experiencing things for the first times in their lives. And we were fortunate enough to see them 3 more days. On the third day that we saw them, they left the den. So again, another remarkable thing to see. They had about a 30-mile hike to get back to that sound that I was talking about, which is where the food is for the mother. The mother eats seals. So these little guys were going to have to take a 30-mile hike with the mother all the way back to the sound, so that the mother, who hadn't eaten in 5 months, could finally find some nourishment. So just an amazing story, and it was pretty touching to watch them walk away from the den. The mother walked in front. The little guys were 10 yards behind, following along, and every now and then they would stop and they would look back toward the den like, we're leaving the den. Should we be doing this? And it was pretty amazing. We didn't move because we didn't want to, alter what they were doing, but they walked away from us, and that was it for us for the day. We found them 2 days later, one more time, and they had bedded down, and we got to see them. I mean, we stood outside again for 8 hours and probably had 20 minutes of shooting time when they actually stood up and played around a little bit, and then they walked away from us again, and we didn't pursue them. You don't want to bother them, but it was an amazing experience to see what was happening in their young lives, and like you said, it was a chance of a lifetime. I'd like to do it again, but I probably won't.
Yeah. Well, I did want to ask you about conservation groups and which ones you know about or you support, and or that you wanted to share. I know there's something like a Save the Yellowstone. I'm trying to edit this, but
yeah, there's Yellowstone Forever supports Yellowstone Park. It's a charitable fund, collects money from the public, and then donates it to the park for certain projects that the park is doing that they don't have the resources for. The national parks across the country have about a $12 billion backlog of work projects and maintenance that just there hasn't been enough money to get to in the past. Now, one thing's changed lately is that Congress lately has approved a bill that will authorize all money that comes from the use of public land, so mining money, cattle grazing on national property,
Spaces, yeah.
public property. I don't know where that money went before, but it's now, they said logically that money should go back into the park. So that money is now flowing back for projects. The budget per year is still tight for the Park Service to actually hire people and that sort of thing, but at least some of the backlog of maintenance is now being addressed.
Okay. Bill, you're pretty accomplished at this point. You've been doing photography as long as I can remember. And actually, some of my earliest memories are spending hot summer days. Actually, it was probably a regular day in September in Florida or October, but it was hot. And we'd be in the dark room developing film, just sweating our brains out for long periods of time in my childhood. So what do you do today to improve and learn? Are there photographers that you look at or different sites that you look at that you recommend? What do you do?
Yeah, I through the years, once we got to all this digital photography, of course I switched over. I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. I loved what I did in the dark room and the landscapes and that sort of thing. But this is much better. It's much cleaner. You don't have all those chemicals, better environmentally. And so, we're a lot better off now. I started off taking, once you take the picture, you had to figure out how to do something with it electronically, how to put it in your computer and how to print one if you wanted to. And so you need to learn a little bit about, they used to have a Photoshop element. It's sort of a beginner's Photoshop thing with just the basics. If a picture's a little too dark, you can lighten it and that sort of thing. So you probably ought to learn that sort of stuff. I learned a lot of that online, learned it by myself. Actually took a Photoshop class or two. But I learned more from other people than I do from anything else. Locally, I took a couple of courses through the local college, Florida Southern College, and one through the Museum of Art. Just to be around 15 other people and a professor that were also doing photography, so you pick up ideas. Everybody has a different way of looking at things, and you learn a lot from other people. And the same way now, when I'm in Yellowstone, every year I go back in May, there's probably 40 of the same photographers that come from around the country and around the world, really, that are there at that cold time of year just to take pictures, and you learn a lot from each other about where to go there and take the pictures and what kind of equipment they're using. So just being around other people and taking a lot of pictures is the best way to learn.
Yeah.
But of course there are a lot of YouTube videos if you're stuck on the technical elements of your camera or your equipment. So,
What about you talk about people that inspired you, like Ansel Adams and John Sexton?
yeah, Ansel Adams, of course. I have all his books. Back in the black and white days, I've studied the gray system and the zone system and the 18% gray, and exactly how to use a camera when it wasn't all electronic and it wasn't done for you. Today's cameras figure all that out for you, for the most part. But my knowledge from having learned that back then helps me take the camera off of automatic, put it on manual, and make it do the things I want it to do in oddball lighting situations. So it's still very helpful. But yeah, Ansel Adams was somebody that every photographer ought to look at, just to think about why a picture was taken and what to look for in a picture and composition. A lot of the wildlife photographers I see are sort of taking pictures and checking off, I got a picture of this species and this species, but they're not really thinking about the composition of the photograph itself. And I think that's what that's the difference between just taking a shot and making a beautiful image that people want to look at
Yeah.
more than once. But John Sexton, you mentioned, I went to a couple of his classes and got to know him a little bit, and went out with him once or twice on shoots. But he actually worked on some of Ansel Adams' photos after Ansel passed away, and helped with the printing and that sort of thing. But he's a great black and white photographer. Lives on the West Coast in California. So you can learn a lot about composition and the basics beyond the automatic stuff that the camera will do for you. You need to know why you're taking a picture and what to include in the picture and what not to include in the picture. So everybody knows what a bear looks like, but a bear in a beautiful setting is a whole different thing.
Yeah. So right now we're all practicing social distancing and spending a lot of time with our family, I imagine. I'm here in Florida and spending a lot of time with mine. And I'm wondering, Dad, how is the coronavirus pandemic affecting you, your photography? What would you normally be doing right now? And what are you doing with all your time instead? Maybe not all your time, but what are you doing instead creatively?
If we weren't in the pandemic, I have a running group that I run with 3 days a week. One Saturday morning that we all go out and run, and we might have a cup of coffee afterwards, but 2 nights a week we run from a local pub of choice and run about 3 miles and burn up 200 or 300 calories, and then we drink 1 or 2 beers and probably drink 600 calories. So I'm not sure where we're getting with that, but we sort of disbanded all that, and we're all social distancing now. So I found myself getting back to my website, which is something that I've been putting off. What I enjoy is being in the field and seeing the animals and anticipating what they're going to do, anticipating getting the perfect picture that I'm looking for. I'm not so wild about sitting at a desk and working on the computer and doing editing, or even more than that, working on a website. So I realize I need to get my website in shape so that I can be proud to show people to go look at my pictures. But I hadn't done it. When I finally started looking at it, I looked to see when the last time I had updated it. I hadn't put a picture on it since 2014. So it's been 6 years with old photographs and no changes. So it's a massive change I had to make. I changed the layout of it, and then I've put in 6 years worth of photographs, and I'm taking out some of my, in art, the stuff you took 6 years ago doesn't look as pretty as what you're doing now. So I took a lot of the old ones out. So I made major progress. I still have a lot of detail work to do, but my home page, when you first go on it, looks pretty good now. It's about where I want it. And I've sort of set up a page that would be favorite pictures that other people have liked or I like, and then I'm working on the other pages, and there's a lot of detail there I need to work on and get it a little better organized. But major improvement. At least it has current photographs in there now. Yeah. So I'm glad to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely making the most of this situation.
Yeah.
And I know this time of year you're usually packing up your camper and the tent and all your gear and getting ready to go out for the spring season when all the babies come out west.
Last year was the earliest I got in there, and it was May the 1st, and it was very cold. It was in the 20s every night, or low 20s, and then it would warm up to 40 something during the day. But that's okay. You're there when the first bears are coming out with their cubs, when the elk babies are being born, and the bison babies are being born. Last year I witnessed that happen. So it's just such a time when the park comes alive for the beginnings of spring. The tourists haven't showed up yet because it's too cold for them. They start showing up in June, July and August being their heavy seasons. So you're getting way ahead of all the other people. You have the animals to yourself, and it's just a pretty time of year. Still a ton of snow around.
Yeah.
It's a great time of year to be there. This year it was so good, I was going to go back and be there a week or two earlier. I was going to go in April.
Yeah.
Now that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The park's actually closed. They closed.
It is.
They closed Yellowstone and the Tetons a couple of days ago. So.
Dad, you want to tell us about any of your favorite memories or your photos where you caught favorite? How do I say this? You want to talk about some photographs that are your favorite memories that captured some of your favorite experiences of being a wildlife photographer anywhere. We talked about Florida earlier, and the polar bears. But which ones are your?
The polar bears would have to rank at the very top. You know, a year ago, I sat down and thought, what places in the world would I want to go and photograph a particular animal more than anywhere else? And the polar bear cubs was number one on my list. And gorillas would be another one. Not so sure I want to do that. That's apparently that you're kind of marched up and you have an hour to sit there and watch, and then you're marched off. And might not be more commercial than what I was looking for. But yeah, the polar bears were as everything I hoped it would be. But I still love being in Yellowstone or Alaska, either one. The unexpected things that could happen. I love to get action shots. I love to get, everybody knows what an eagle looks like, but I love to get them flying or catching a fish or picking up a fish out of a lake or get two bears with their mouths open, growling at each other.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the most beautiful pictures, but just the fact that you caught the action. It's kind of a sport when you do that kind of stuff to see what you can catch. So I have several of those shots. I have some big grizzlies up closer than I should have been because they suddenly appeared close to me. And those mentally leave a story in my mind, but the picture is still a beautiful picture of a bear being close.
Yeah.
So, but there's a lot of pretty things. We go to Yellowstone in the winter also. Just a red fox in the snow is a pretty thing. The bison in the snow are great to see. The wolves are much easier to find and sometimes come a little closer in the winter.
Okay, earlier this year, you were in Yellowstone before the pandemic set in, and you had a really special experience on a snow coach with some wildlife. You want to talk about that?
I did. Very fortunate. As I said, most of the time you're shooting wolves in Yellowstone, you're seeing them a mile away, and people look through scopes and watch them, so you're not getting many photographs. But we were in a snow coach and went into the interior of the park. And as we were coming out, and we were 15 minutes from our final destination, we looked in the road ahead of us, and I could see that there were two animals coming over the rise. And I thought, that's a wolf. And the driver goes, wolf. So he stops the vehicle, and I'm looking at the door thinking, let me out of here, because I want to get this picture. And as I'm watching, it wasn't two wolves. There were two more coming behind them, and two more coming behind that. And before you could hardly realize what was going on, it was a pack of wolves. And it turned out to be the largest pack in Yellowstone. The average size is about 10 wolves. There's some smaller. This one has 18 wolves.
Wow.
And a white wolf is a white female is a leader of this pack. But the good news is he opened the door. We got out. I jumped out with my long lens and got down low and took a couple of pictures. And then the driver inside was saying, guys, they're 100 yards away and they're still walking at us. They're not going around us. Get back in. So that's not what I wanted to hear, but I packed up, got back inside, respect the animals. I mean, they weren't threatening, but they were just walking right at us. And so we got back inside the vehicle, and here I was with a long lens on my camera. They walked right to the vehicle. You could shoot them out the windshield. You could shoot them out the side window.
Needed your iPhone.
I was scrambling. I always have that second camera. It was laying in the seat, but it had a fairly long lens on it, so I tried to get that to work through these tinted windows, and so I did get a few shots through the windows. And then finally they moved away, after 5 minutes or so, they moved away from us. Probably the closest one was 50 yards or 100 yards, and all 18 stood still and started howling.
Wow.
And it was an amazing experience. We were back outside. One lady had her iPhone on, fortunately, and we could hear the howling again later on. When you hear that, it's like church music or something. Everybody just looks at each other, smiles, and goes, "Oh my God!" It's an amazing thing to hear that many wolves up close howling. So that was, whether we could get pictures of them or not, they were facing away from us mostly. It was still a unique, close experience, and something I'll always remember. And everybody on that bus will remember it too. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining me on the show today. You're my first interview.
All right.
Yep, you're my first interview. And I just wanted to share Bill's story. It's billittlephotography.com if you want to check out his website that's under construction. And give him some praise and possibilities. And yeah, I think I always learn when I'm out shooting with my dad. I always pick up photo tips, and I can usually identify more birds than after the shoot than before the shoot.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it for today.
All right.
Bye.